Welcome to this lecture series on Environment and Ecology presented by Mentors for IS in association with Bangalore IS Academy and Namak APSC. So in this particular video, we'll actually be discussing about evolution. But before discussing about evolution, we do have certain other things. So finally, after discussing those things, we will move on to evolution in brief. Now, everything that we are going to discuss about will be in brief, in general. Okay, so the first topic that we'll take up for today is mutation. Now, a mutation is nothing but a change that occurs in our DNA sequence, either due to mistakes when the DNA is copied or as a result of a certain environmental factors. See, what happens is over a lifetime, our DNA can undergo changes or mutations in the sequences of bases, that is your nitrogen bases, adenine, guanine, thymine, or cytosine. These mutations can occur during DNA replication if errors are made and not corrected in time. Since the sequence of nitrogen bases actually contain the information for protein synthesis and mutations involves changes to these sequences, the proteins that are produced may also be changed, and this could be a good thing or a bad thing. Now, these mutations may occur as a result of exposure to environmental factors such as smoking, UV light, or radiation. Generally, cells can recognize any potentially mutation causing damage and repair it because if it is not fixed, sometimes it could be really dangerous. Take cancer for example. Cancer is nothing but due to a mutation gone wrong, because of which this body's system is going haywire, where certain cells might start to reproduce at a much faster rate than it is supposed to. So mutations can actually result in several things, where some mutations can be very bad, whereas some other mutations can actually help the species to evolve and adapt to its surrounding environment. Now, the reason we are actually studying mutations is that it contributes to genetic variation in species, that is, the difference in DNA sequence between individuals. These variations can also be inherited, especially if they have a positive effect, and variations over a period of time can lead to evolution. So you can just go through this diagram over here, which will give you a broad understanding as to what are the different environmental factors which can actually stimulate this mutation. I mean, rather than stimulation, cause mutation. Okay, so you can have radiations, chemicals, and infectious agents. Now, acquired mutations, there's something known as acquired mutations and hereditary mutations. Hereditary mutations are inherited from a parent and are present throughout a person's life in virtually every cell in the body. These mutations are also called germline mutations because they are present in the parent's egg or sperm cells, which are called the germ cells. Similarly, we can have acquired mutations, also known as somatic mutations, which occur at some time during a person's life and are present in only certain cells. So these are due to exposure to certain environmental factors. For example, those given on the image towards your right hand side. So these things may not be in every cell in the body. These changes can be caused by environmental factors such as ultraviolet radiation and from the sun, or can occur if an error is made as DNA copies itself during cell division. So this is one example of mutation where this mutation has mutated the genes which carry the information for the production of melanin in the body. Now, melanin is the pigment which gives this dark coloration. So if there is mutation and to the genes which are responsible for carrying the information for the production of melanin, nothing but a protein itself, then you are not able to produce this protein or melanin, because of which you will not have dark pigmentation. So in several organisms it can actually be seen, and this is known as albinism. So you can see this here in a gorilla or on a lioness on the right hand side, and you can actually compare it with a normal lion which is able to produce this melanin, and this lion, due to mutation, it is not able to produce melanin, and therefore it has very light coloration. Next, we move on to natural selection. Now, natural selection is the mechanism of evolution and is also considered to be the engine that drives evolution. The theory of natural selection was actually proposed by Charles Darwin. Now, in order to understand this, we will consider a few important things. The first point that we'll consider is traits are often heritable. Traits are often heritable. In living organisms, many characteristics are inherited, that is passed on from one generation to another. That is from parents to offsprings, where genes carry the information. The second point that we'll consider is more offsprings are produced than can survive. So organisms are capable of producing more offsprings than the environment can support. Thus, there is competition for limited resources in each generation. It could be competition for food, for mates, for a suitable habitat. The third point that we will consider is offsprings vary in their heritable traits. That is, the offspring in any generation will be slightly different from one another in their traits, and many of these features will be heritable. Example is the color, size, shape, etc. Finally, we move on to the last point, which says beneficial traits will become more common. So some individuals will have inherited traits that help them to survive and reproduce given the conditions of the environment. The individuals with helpful or beneficial traits will leave more offsprings in the next generation than their peers, as they are more effective at surviving and reproducing. Hence, the helpful traits will become more common in the next generation, and the population will become adapted to its environment. So this is not clear. Let us take an example, and through this example, this particular concept should be entirely clear. So take this image over here, take the first image. Okay, so here we can see that there's a population of mice which has moved into a new area where the rocks are very dark. Due to natural genetic variation, some mice are dark in color, that is black in color, whereas some mice are light in color. Now what happens is, in this particular environment, eagles do eat mice. Now what will happen? Those mice which are light in color are more visible to predatory birds than the black mice. Therefore, the light colored mice are eaten at a higher frequency than the black mice. Hence, only the surviving mice reach the reproductive age and leave offspring. So what will happen? Only those mice which are dark in color will be able to reproduce more. Because the black mice had a higher chance of leaving offspring than the light colored or tan mice, the next generation contains a higher fraction of black mice than the previous generation. Why? Because in this particular habitat, being dark in color was more favorable. A dark colored coat was beneficial to them, and hence it was passed on to the next generation. So it is best summed up when Charles Darwin actually said it is nothing but survival of the fittest. Desirable traits will be passed on from one generation to another generation, whereas undesirable traits will be eliminated over a period of time through a course of evolution. So in this particular environment, a dark colored coat for the mice is beneficial and therefore it is passed on to the next generation. Whereas a light colored coat is not beneficial and hence it is eliminated through a course of evolution or time. So this concept is known as natural selection, where there is some factor in the nature which will favor some traits and it is not going to favor or is unfavorable to certain other traits. Okay, so if you've understood natural selection, there is one another important concept known as genetic drift, which also drives evolution. So apart from natural selection, genetic drift is also an evolutionary mechanism. This genetic drift is also known as genetic sampling error and is a change in the gene pool of a small population that takes place strictly by chance. Please remember, this is strictly by chance. This genetic drift can result in genetic traits being lost from a population or becoming widespread in a population. So, two ways. It could become lost from a population or it could also become widespread in a population irrespective of its benefit or the survival or reproductive value. I'm going to repeat this. Please remember, the genetic drift can result in certain traits being lost from a population or becoming widespread irrespective of its benefit, irrespective of its survival value, and irrespective of its reproductive value, unlike what we had discussed in natural selection. So, what will happen is, for genetic drift, we'll have to consider something known as alleles. Now, alleles are nothing but the possible forms of a gene, the different variants of a gene. So simply put, this is nothing but a change in the allele frequencies in a population from generation to generation that occurs due to chance events. If this is still not clear, let us actually consider an example. Okay, so take this example over here. Let us consider a small rabbit population consisting of 8 brown rabbits and 2 white rabbits. So the frequencies of the alleles, that is capital B is one allele, small b is another allele. Capital B is dominant, whereas small b is recessive. Capital B is responsible for a brown colored coat, small b is responsible for a white colored coat. I'm pretty sure you should be able to understand and relate to this. When discussing about Mendelian characters, you should have in school, when this particular concept was taught, Mendelian genetics, I'm sure you would have discussed about a tall pea plant and a short pea plant, where capital T being dominant and a tall plant, whereas small t represented a recessive trait being a short plant. Similarly, in this case, we have capital B and small b representing the color of the coat. So in the first scenario over here, if you count the number of capital B's, it should be 10 totally. And if you count the number of small b's, it should also be 10. So the ratio of the number of capital B's and the small b's, that is alleles, is the same. Now, what I want you to consider is that, what if only the 5 circled rabbits, what if only the 5 circled rabbits reproduce? Maybe the other 5 died for reasons unrelated to coat color, or they decided not to reproduce, or they ran away somewhere. Whatever the reason, only the 5 circled rabbits actually reproduce. Now what will happen? In the surviving group, the frequency of capital B and small b alleles have changed now. So now you can, in the second image, that is in the second generation, you can count the number of capital B's and then you can count the number of small b's. Now the ratio of capital B's and small b's have actually changed, where there is a higher proportion of capital B and there is a lesser proportion of small b's. And this is all nothing but due to chance, where B allele is being completely lost from the population. So what if from the second generation only 2 rabbits that are circled reproduce? The other rabbits, for some reason, we don't know why, it could be any reason, they decide to become bachelors for some reason. Okay, and they say that I am not going to marry, I will not reproduce. Only the two rabbits which are circled, they say that we will start a family, and they decide to reproduce for some reason. Now what will happen, since the only two rabbits which are actually reproducing and are resulting in the formation of a third generation only carry capital B alleles, the small b allele is completely lost from the population, and this is nothing but due to chance. It is not to do with respect to, say, you have an eagle or a fox targeting only light colored rabbits. It is nothing to do with that. It is nothing to do with food availability, habitat, survival, nothing. It is only that due to some chance only these two rabbits are actually reproducing. So unlike natural selection, this is nothing but chance. So this is known as genetic drift. Now, over a period of time, we only have rabbits with capital B alleles, and therefore all the rabbits will be brown in color. I hope you are able to understand the difference between natural selection and genetic drift. In natural selection, there has to be favorable traits. But when it comes to genetic drift, it has nothing to do with favorable traits. It is all with respect to chance. Uh, However, I want you to remember that the genetic drift also depends upon the population. The population size actually matters. Larger the populations, larger populations are unlikely to change quickly as a result of genetic drift. See, in this particular example, in the third generation itself, we had all rabbits brown in color. But imagine instead of 10 rabbits in the first generation, we had 5 lakh rabbits. Now, do you think from that 5 lakh rabbits, in the next two generations, we'll only end up in 2 rabbits? It is very unlikely. Okay, because chance does not mean that, even though chance does not dictate a particular probability or a result, but it is very unlikely. That is the reason, if the population is very high, it is not possible that we'll only end up with brown rabbits in the next two generations. Okay. Next, we move on to evolution. Now, evolution is very simple. I'm pretty sure everybody understands. The theory of evolution is based on the idea that all species are related and gradually change over time. This is because of genetic variations due to mutation and also other factors such as natural selection and genetic drift, which will affect the physical characteristics of an organism. Some of the characteristics may give the individual an advantage over the other individuals, which they can pass on to their offspring. So evolution is the change in characteristics of a species over several generations. So there are different types of evolutions. So we will be considering three types of evolutions. The first is convergent evolution. What do you mean by convergent evolution? When the same adaptations evolve independently under similar selection pressures, this is known as convergent evolution. For example, flying insects, birds, and bats have all evolved the ability to fly, but independently of each other. This is convergent evolution. Next, we move on to coevolution. When two species or groups of species have evolved alongside each other, where one adapts to changes in the other. For example, flowering plants and pollinating insects such as bees evolving to meet each other's needs. This is coevolution. Finally, we have adaptive radiation, which we have already discussed in the earlier videos. So this is when a species splits into a number of new forms when a change in the environment makes new resources available or creates new environmental challenges. For example, you have your finches on the Galapagos Islands, which have developed different shaped beaks to take advantage of the different kinds of food available on different islands. So this is adaptive radiation. Now, there is one other thing which is actually related to evolution, which is known as the theory of inheritance of acquired characters, or sometimes simply as the theory of use and the theory of disuse. So, simply, this is nothing but the theory of use and disuse. So, this particular theory was proposed by Lamarck. So what happened was that Lamarck was actually struck by the similarities of many animals he studied and was impressed by the fossil records. So this led him to argue that when environments change, organisms also had to change their behavior to survive. If they began to use an organ more than they had in the past, it would increase in its lifetime. The best example is that of a giraffe. So, if a giraffe stretched its neck for leaves, for example, a nervous fluid would flow into its neck and make it longer. Therefore, its offspring would also inherit the longer neck, and continued stretching would make it longer still over several generations. Meanwhile, organs that the organism stopped using would shrink. So this is known as the theory of use and disuse, meaning if any organism uses one organ more and more, that is being used and that will be passed on over a period of time to the next generations, whereas those organs which are not used may be put into a state of disuse. Now, Lamarck tried to use this theory of use and disuse to explain evolution. So, for example, if you take this giraffe over here, how did this giraffe, which was only the size of a deer, grow so tall? So, the best explanation is obviously as the trees grew taller and the food on the ground became scarcer, these giraffes also tried to stretch more and more, and eventually today these giraffes are very tall. So, according to the theory of use and disuse by Lamarck, this is because the giraffe stretched more and more, and since they used the muscles in the neck more and more, it increased in length, and hence today giraffes are very tall. But the problem is that this theory of use and disuse is not universal. See, obviously, if you take the example of your appendix, now since we always consume cooked food, there is no necessity of the appendix to digest starch. Therefore, the appendix has been put into a state of disuse and is a vestigial organ. So, in this case, yes, the theory of use and disuse is true. But the theory of use and disuse does not explain evolution always, unless for certain things. In a few cases, yes, the theory of use and disuse is true, but it does not explain evolution itself. Evolution is explained through natural selection. It is actually explained through natural selection, where natural selection can be considered to be universal, unlike the theory of use and disuse. Finally, we take up extinction. Very simple. Extinction is nothing but the cessation of existence of a species or group of taxa, reducing biodiversity on planet Earth. The moment of extinction is generally considered to be the death of last individual of that species. Now, the reason for extinction could be several. It could be habitat degradation, it could be climate change, it could be disease, it could be predation, it could be competition, genetic pollution, etc. and etc. Now, the problem with extinction is that as of today, we are experiencing the sixth mass extinction. See, over a period of time, since the origin or birth of life on planet Earth, we have already had 5 mass extinctions earlier. And the sixth mass extinction is actually going on. The sixth mass extinction is known as the Holocene extinction or the Anthropocene extinction. So you should consider yourself fortunate or maybe even unfortunate to actually live in an era where you're able to see or witness species going extinct. See, maybe many of you would feel bad that you could never see the dinosaurs go extinct. So you should actually be considering yourself fortunate that you are now able to see all these species going extinct. The reason being that these species are going extinct nothing but due to human activities. We are the sole reason for the sixth mass extinction. See, naturally extinction happens. Many species will go extinct, but there is a natural process to it. But as of today, due to man-made activities, this rate of species going extinct has increased considerably. So, to a very great extent, human activities are the reason for several species going extinct. And this is known as the Holocene extinction or Anthropocene extinction. A question has already been asked regarding this particular topic in your civil services examination. So this is actually a very serious crisis. I was just joking that we should be fortunate. It is actually very unfortunate that we are actually witnessing this sixth mass extinction, and it is being accelerated nothing but due to human activities. I'm pretty sure during this coronavirus lockdown, you would have come across news where other plants and species, animals are actually thriving when human activities have actually reduced. So I'm pretty sure you should be able to relate to this when I say that man-made activities, human activities are actually responsible for this extinction. So I hope these topics and these concepts are clear. If not, I would also suggest you to read a bit more, but do not go too deep into it because it is not necessary. Please always restrict yourself to surface level knowledge because that is more than enough. Still, if you do have any doubts, please do write to us in the comment section. Thank you.